This is the My Lady ADHD podcast, a place to find common ground with other ADHDers, where we learn all about our ADHD brains while laughing alongside amazing guests who really get it. My name is Trina Haynes, and I'm so grateful you're here. Let's do this thing together. Hi, guys. Welcome. I guess this is episode number 1. What? So wild. In true ADHD fashion, I had a lot of hopes for this first episode. I was going to really dive into what ADHD is, and I wanted to start with the basics. Of course, I had big hopes and dreams for what this would look like. And then after talking to several people, I had recorded several podcast episodes. I ended up choosing this episode with Sarah Lovell. So this is not an episode where we dive into the nitty-gritty of ADHD. I'm going to save that for later. But this time we talk about executive functioning. And I wanted to share it early on in the podcast because it's something that I just personally did not know a lot about. And for someone who's technically in the ADHD industry, I find that to be really not comforting since it is a major, major part of ADHD. Sarah is an executive functioning coach, which I didn't even know was a thing until recently, and now I feel like I need one. She's been doing this work since about 2014, and I found her approach to coaching just so refreshing, and she comes with a different perspective because she actually doesn't even have ADHD. Most of my guests on this podcast do have ADHD, but I found it really interesting to talk to someone who doesn't have ADHD to get their perspective on what it looks like from the outside. I wanted to tell you that I will get to some episodes that dive a little bit deeper into ADHD, what the symptoms are, what it really looks like. But I do want to start with this episode with Sarah Lovell because I think it's important. She talks a lot about self-talk and how important that is for someone with ADHD, and I really, really believe that. Before we dive into this episode, I wanted to tell you a couple of things that are going on in my world. A few ADHD-isms that happened to me this week. So a couple of days ago, I had some plans to meet some family at the movie theater. We were going to see a kids movie. It was going to be super fun. And I definitely showed up at the wrong theater and missed about 20 minutes of the movie. It was another one of those moments where the whole family was kind of laughing at my mix-up because it's so typical me. It's something that I have done regularly, and I have such a loving and supportive family that they just kind of giggle with me through these moments, and they don't make me feel bad, usually. Sometimes they do. So that happened. I also want to keep it super real with you. I've been out of town for quite a while on and off. I've had a couple of work trips, and my house is a complete disaster right now. My dog Yoshi has taken full advantage of this situation, and he has toys spread out all over the house. He likes to eat cardboard, and it literally looks like I live on an episode of Hoarders right now. And my last day at my full-time corporate job is today. I did not even think this through, obviously, where my last day was on one day, and then the very next day was when my podcast launched. So needless to say, I have a lot of things going on in my world. But one of the things I'm looking forward to the most is recording more episodes for the podcast. I'm having such a good time talking to other people about ADHD. It's one of my favorite subjects, clearly. And I'm really hoping that you enjoy this conversation with Sarah. So without further ado, let's talk about executive functioning. I am so excited, you guys. I am joined today by Sarah Lovell. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I know. Yeah, I'm excited about this too because I feel like a lot of people will benefit from this conversation. Just like there's so much we don't know about executive functioning, and that's what we're going to be talking about with Sarah today. Because Sarah is a coach, an executive functioning coach. So I do want to hear a little bit about your background and like how you ended up as an executive functioning coach. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's such a long, windy road. I'll try to keep it concise. But so I had no idea executive function coaching was a job or a thing when
Me
I
either.
first, yeah. And people still ask me, like, when I say what I do, they're like, but what is that? And it is truly the most magical job. It doesn't feel like a job. But I got into coaching back in 2014 when I was living in Boston. I had gone to undergrad for psychology and was really focused on the brain, how we learn, and mental health. I thought professionally I wanted to go PhD track, clinical psych. So I got a research position in Boston. And living in Boston, I needed a side hustle. So I was working full time as a researcher at a university, a research assistant at a university, focusing on like basically like how our brain processes social cues. Um, and I got a part-time job doing coaching for adults who had autism, Asperger's, high functioning autism, and basically was working as a coach in that field through an agency and loved helping people navigate all sorts of different goals related to their careers, their educations, life in general. And I realized that that one-on-one work is really what I wanted to focus on, that research wasn't my passion. So I went from that coaching field into grad school for social work with a focus on clinical mental health counseling. And did a couple of field placements and was doing mental health counseling for years, but still working as a coach, very part-time through an agency. And I ended up, while I was in grad school, I was connected with a college student, and he was looking basically for help learning how to learn. And so he was my first like private client. I didn't even, at that point, I didn't even call it executive function coaching. I was just like an academic coach helping him. But I realized that he was trying to use systems that didn't work for him. And he was trying over and over and over to use these systems because he was told these are the systems that work for students. And these are the systems that are going to work for you the rest of your life. Like you just have to learn how to use this system. And I realized it was like a spark of an idea that I was like, people are if he's one student working against how his brain works, there are more people out here like this who are being told, this is the system, this is the box, and this is how you should go through life, is use these systems. And so that's where it all kind of came together for me, was my background in mental health counseling, the research and classes I had taken on the brain, how we learn, and then my coaching background kind of all started coming together into realizing what executive function coaching was.
Wow.
That is how I got into it, was truly like this, all these different things came together, and I worked with this one student who I actually just reconnected with recently, now that he's in grad school.
Yeah, how's he doing?
He's doing great. He's loving life. And he basically, with him, I figured out like I can use what I've learned to help people learn about themselves. So it was a really slow roll for me. And I didn't leave. I was still working full time as a social worker for many years. And COVID was actually my silver lining in COVID, was that people were looking for support in this area, even though they didn't know what the name of it was.
Yeah.
And so people started finding me more and more, and realizing that Zoom was a way to work and get support. So I launched my private practice full time in January of 2022, this year. And so I've been coaching full time this whole year, which has been amazing. And I've grown past students. I've worked with some high school students, college students, but most recently, the primary people who are finding me are adults who have been diagnosed with ADHD later in life. I'm putting that in quotes. It's not late in life, but it feels later, 20s, 30s, 40s. And so they're wanting to learn about their brain, how their brain works, and to find systems that work for them. And that's where coaching can come in. So that's a really long, rambly story about how I got into coaching.
No, that makes total sense to me, definitely. And I can see how college students in particular would be the ones reaching out for help. I hear a lot of college students on my end that are struggling, but also just adults who are getting diagnosed who are just trying to work in the workplace and are really struggling at work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know I'm assuming we have the same followers because yeah, I hear that so much. And I personally have been through a lot of the same um feelings of like, why are these systems that people want me to use, why are they not working for me? And just feeling like a complete idiot most of the time because it works for everyone else.
And that is the most frustrating thing too, because then it impacts, self-esteem and what we're saying to ourselves, like all of those things, like self-talk and self-care, truly, in my opinion, are the foundation of our executive functioning. Like what we say to ourselves and how we take care of ourselves impacts our ability. So actually, I'll even say what executive functioning is, because there's no
yeah, I was
clear
going to ask, let's talk about what executive functioning even is, because it does come up a lot in the ADHD community. Like it is a huge like keyword buzzword for people with ADHD, but I don't think people really understand it that well.
Exactly. Yeah. So executive functioning is basically it's a mental process. It's our cognitive process, and it is how we plan, organize, prioritize, like sustain attention, focus, manage our time, self-regulate, like our emotional regulation, starting tasks, problem solving, finishing tasks, the follow through piece, flexible thinking, basically all of these high order
How we function.
how we function. Yes. And I think it's so important to like comment that everybody uses and needs executive functioning skills every single day. It's not just students, it's not just people who are having challenges or are struggling with it. And executive functioning skills are learned. It's not something that we're like innately born with. We learn these skills and processes by observing, by trial and error, by being given systems, although those systems, as we've talked about, they don't always work for us because everyone has a unique brain. And so some people are able to take systems that they're given K through 12 and said, this is how you use a planner. This is how you make a to-do list. This is how you pay attention. That works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. And so being able to identify what your strengths are and where your challenges are can help come up with systems that'll work for you. And it takes time and practice. But I think that's like the most important thing, is like recognizing that this is something that everybody uses. But it's figuring out what's going to work best for you.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So when you're, and I've never worked with an executive functioning coach, so I'm like interested in how you go about doing that. So I'm guessing you like go over people's strengths and like how they work, best. But like, what is one thing that's common that you hear from ADHDers specifically that they're struggling with in this area?
Oh,
Can you think of anything?
Yeah. So I think oftentimes people reach out with, there's a specific thing that they're noticing they're having a challenge with, whether it's at school or at work. They're wanting to, mostly it's being tired, frustrated, overwhelmed, with trying to use a system that doesn't work, or feeling like they don't have any system at all.
Yeah.
And so having that goal of wanting to create something that's going to help with their specific goal that they have in mind, whether it's, being more organized at work, or starting tasks, finishing tasks, for my students, passing their classes.
Procrastination.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like procrastination is an interesting one, because I think there's a difference between being stuck and procrastinating. So I think like that's something that I talk about with clients all the time. Like when we're stuck, we're not sure, or I'm sorry, when we're stuck, we know what we need to do, and we
We're
know
just paralyzed.
paralyzed, exactly. And so it's
Yeah.
figuring out, how do you get unstuck? And I think like for me, the words that we use are really important, because if we're saying like I'm lazy, I'm procrastinating, again, that self-talk piece is the foundation of our executive functioning. So if we're saying those things to ourselves, like I know I'm going to procrastinate, or well, it's just because I'm lazy, I can't get started, like that becomes the barrier to taking that first step or thinking about how to take that first step. So that self-talk piece is definitely something that I talk about with clients, and kind of work through from a coaching perspective. But I think like the most important part about coaching is the concrete part. Like people want to figure out a system that's going to work for them.
Right.
And so we're focusing on that like clear action item. But at the same time, we're doing it by focusing on what are you saying to yourself? What are you feeling in that moment? Because if you don't address that, then that's where it's like you can have the system, but if you're calling yourself lazy or you're saying I always procrastinate, then it's going to be hard to put that system into place.
So that's really interesting. So like someone with ADHD, I guarantee they've said to themselves, I'm lazy and I'm procrastinating, and they're putting all of that on themselves.
Mhm.
What's a way to like shift that? Like what's like another way we can say that? Because I don't want people to think that they're lazy when really there's, so much else going on. Like is there some other like shift that you can recommend people make?
Yeah. And I think so. The way that I talk with clients about it is finding wording that's going to fit best for you. So there's no like cookie cutter reframe for it. Just like there's no cookie cutter system, right? Like there's like how we're talking about, but I think like it's validating how you feel, right? So saying like, this is hard and I am frustrated, right? Like those are ones that I have used for myself. This is hard and I am frustrated and I want to do this thing, or I want to take the next step. So what I work on with clients is like coming up with that short reframe that you can practice saying to yourself, like, this is hard. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm going to take the smallest, most realistic step. And like those are the things, that small realistic step I talk about all the time, because if we're only giving ourselves credit for when we check the box and accomplish the big task, it's going to take so much more time, energy, and effort to get there, because we're not giving ourselves credit along the way
For the
so
steps.
for the steps.
Man.
Yeah. So if you're able to say like, okay, the smallest, most realistic step for me right now is to open my laptop, or to walk into my office, or to make a brain dump, right? It doesn't have to be something super concrete, but giving yourself that small, realistic step, I think can be an action item to help with that reframe of like, I don't have to do the whole thing right now. I'm not going to do the whole thing right now.
I've started doing that because like I used to do like a huge to-do list, like all of people with ADHD. And I would say stuff like, okay, you need to check your emails. Okay, well, that's super broad because I have 200 emails and like some of them are super specific and super important. So I've started to, on my to-do list, like sit down at your laptop. And then when that's done, I like check it off. Okay, open your email, check, like really. And I think that's what you're talking about here is like breaking down an overwhelming task and putting it into very small steps. And literally, if you have to check off that you sat at your laptop, like that actually might work for you. And so I think it's something so small is like shifting that mindset of like, wow, this task is super overwhelming. Okay, like, well, just put your shoes on. Like, just start there. like just put your shoes on. And like that's a small win. So you're like, okay, I did that one. I'm gonna move on to the next one. And like it's just they didn't teach us this in school. They just did not. It was like not my brain didn't work that way, where like, a huge task is so daunting for someone with ADHD and so overwhelming that we get paralyzed. And I think it's really important to break down steps into very small bite-sized pieces. And it sounds so simple and so like elementary school, but it is so helpful for someone with ADHD. So I really like that advice.
Yeah. And I think, for again, like whenever I talk with clients, I always say like you are the expert in you, right? Like you know what hasn't worked for you, you know what's currently working for you, or you're making work well enough. And so it's like figuring out, how to shift and build on what's already working and like basically transferring that from one place to another. So if you making those tiny lists is working in one area, how can you create a similar system somewhere else for yourself? Like building on those systems, and then recognizing, I think a lot of times clients talk about like having a system and then something changes, right? Their schedule changes, they miss a day, they don't open their notebook, and then the system like drops off the planet, right?
It does. It so does.
And that's like, I think that's like a human nature thing, like that, like it's hard to kind of build that momentum again. And so, and again, we haven't really talked about dopamine yet, but like our brains are looking for that dopamine, right? And so it's figuring out how to take something that is working or that you want to get back to and make it exciting again. Because like we go through honeymoon phases with strategies, right? Like they work, they're exciting, they're brand new. And so we use them and it feels really good. And then something shifts. Maybe it doesn't work one day. Like I said, like your schedule changes. And so it's how can you take something that you've liked in the past or that's worked for you in the past and just like spruce it up a little bit so that your brain connects with it in a new way and like gives you that little bit of a dopamine boost that maybe you haven't had in a while using
that. And it's so tough for people with ADHD because we also will like forget that those things exist. They just fall off the face of the planet and you're like, oh yeah, I used to use a timer to get stuff done, and that's really difficult. And so I have struggled with like, okay, I have systems, I know they work, but like where are they? What did I do with them? What was working for me last week? I don't remember. Like how do I find that? So like how do you keep track of like the things that do work for you? Like do you just put that on a notebook somewhere? Like I don't know.
That is such a good question. So out of sight, out of mind is so real because we are keeping track, everybody is keeping track of so many things in their brain all the time. And people with ADHD are keeping track of significantly more. Like I think that's both a strength and a challenge for people with ADHD that people have talked about, like creative thoughts coming, like being able to bounce around ideas, like that can be a huge strength, but it can also be a challenge at the exact same time because you have competing ideas, you have things that you're trying to keep track of. And so I say absolutely everybody should have an external system because it's so unfair to our brains to say you need to keep track of all of this for me. And so
I think that's a really good reminder to people with ADHD that like there's no way you could be lazy. Like think of all the things you're keeping track of in your brain. It's actually more than the average person, and there's nothing lazy about that. Like we're actually overachieving every single day.
You are working so hard. Yes. And I cannot attribute this quote to the right person because I don't know who it is, but maybe I can find it and we can put it in the show notes. But there was a thing that I saw on Instagram that was like, if you're at 40% in the day and you're giving 40%, you're giving 100%. Right. And so if you're fatigued, stressed, overwhelmed, tired, and you're at that 40%, but you're giving that 40%, it's 100. And so I think like it's a good reminder of like our brains are constantly going. And so how do we create like a break for our brain? And that's external because we can't keep everything internal.
Yeah, I think the only way I've survived for several years now is I journal. So I do the brain dump and I get a lot out of my brain. And that's been so helpful for me.
Mhm.
Because like I just have to get that crap out of there.
Mhm.
But I do still struggle with like the external, like reminders of like what does work for me because my brain has just got so much going on that I don't even know where to start sometimes. I know that's like super relatable for a lot of people with ADHD is like I know that there are systems and tools that work for me, but like where are they?
Yep.
And what do I do? Like if I can't find them, then I'm just like I'm paralyzed at that point. So yeah, I really like the idea of like some sort of external system where you can find all of the tools that work for you in one place, whether that's like a notebook where you just write down what works for you. I don't know if you've seen if you know Danny Donovan, but she wrote a book recently and it's called The Anti-Planner. And it's a whole book filled of like different ways to motivate your brain to do things. And
Mhm.
it's incredible and it's coming out soon. So I just wanted to drop that
Oh,
because I feel like that will be really handy for a lot of people with ADHD is it's a huge book filled with like, hey,
yeah.
if you're struggling today to get stuff done, like here's a whole book of like different ways to motivate your brain. And I feel like this is what I needed in high school. It's what I needed in college. And it's people with ADHD are now coming up with their own ways to help others.
Yeah.
And that's what's been like the coolest thing I think recently in social media land is like we're all like, hey, those tools don't work for any of us like but you guys should try this and like actually having other ADHDers come up with systems that work for everyone else is like just the coolest thing.
I love that like crowdsourcing. I can't wait to read that book. That sounds excellent. Cause yeah, I
It's
think
so
like
good.
there's this the like joke is like make a to-do list and it'll work, right? Like that works for some people. It doesn't work for all people. Even writing things down doesn't work. Like I ask my clients, like, what do you think is going to work for you? Or what are you open to trying to start? And I've had some clients say, I literally can't write it down. Like writing it down doesn't help for me. So we
Hmm.
talked about, creating audio like recordings on your phone. Technology can be wonderful because it's this like additional layer, an additional brain. But it can also create that analysis paralysis of like there are so many options
Yes.
of systems. And so what I always say is like start small, like pick one and try it, like view it as like a science experiment. Try it for a week. If it doesn't work, it's not you that's not working, it's the system that's not working for you. So it's okay to
Mm.
leave that system
That's
behind.
so important because I think with ADHD, if somebody's like, "Hey, you should try the Pomodoro timer method," and you try it and it doesn't work for you, you're like, "I suck as a human. This works for everyone else. Why isn't this working for me?" And I think it's just so important that people with ADHD know that like not every tool works for every person and don't take it personally if it doesn't work for you. It's not
Yeah.
like it's the self-talk like you're talking about. And I recognize now that I've been diagnosed for a while and I am surrounded by ADHDers in my community. And I hear the same messages over and over and over again where people feel like they're lazy and that they're just not competent or like procrastinating when really it's so much bigger than that. And I think it's just so important to not blame yourself and to actually maybe blame the tool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's really like to externalize that. Like you're not broken. The system you're trying to use is
Doesn't
broken
work.
for you, doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
And so even like naming what is going on for yourself, like I'm trying something new. I don't like it. I'm going to try something else. And like that's a win.
Yeah.
Even though it might
Yeah.
not feel like it, that initial feel of like, oh, this should have worked, or I want like that should, right? We should on
Yeah.
ourselves. Um, but being able to, and I think like that is like giving yourself credit again. Like I really hone in on giving ourselves credit along the way. Because again, that's not something that we're really taught. We're not taught to like give ourselves the like pat on the back or like I'm doing a good job until we reach the goal. So it's like important to do that each step of the way because then that helps build the momentum and build the self-confidence, the self-talk, all of that along the way.
I really hope you're enjoying this chat. I wanted to take a quick break to tell you about one of the tools that I keep in my ADHD toolbox, Evernote. Evernote is an app that I use to help keep the chaos in check. I use it to take notes, keep up with tasks, and manage my schedule all in one place. Evernote doesn't force you to organize a certain way, which is really helpful for my ADHD brain. It syncs up with other apps like Google Drive, Slack, Outlook, Gmail, and more. I'm a big fan of Evernote. It's one of the products that I recommend most to ADHDers. To learn more about Evernote, visit evernote.com. And now, back to the show. So I know that I feel this and I relate to it, but you told me earlier you don't have ADHD.
I do. No, I do not have ADHD. And I think
So interesting. I love that when like people without ADHD end up in this field because I feel like it's a different perspective that we do need. I mean, it's also super helpful to have like coaches who do have ADHD. Like I recognize
Mhm.
how helpful that is, but I do like an outsider perspective of like it's just so different. So how has that impacted you as a coach not having ADHD in this industry?
Yeah. So it's so funny. I get asked about if I have ADHD when I've done podcasts, especially when it's like an ADHD audience. Um, and I've only been asked, I think maybe 2 or 3 times by clients if I have
Hmm.
ADHD. So I don't know if clients are assuming or not assuming that I have ADHD or not.
Well, they just want help.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, oh, you can help me. Okay, take my money.
Yeah, but I think it's so important. So executive functioning, as we've talked about, is something that we all use and need every single day. So it is prominent in the ADHD field because that executive functioning skills and strategies is so interwoven into many of the challenges that people experience with ADHD and the diagnosis of ADHD. But people without an ADHD diagnosis can also experience those challenges with executive functioning skills. Um, and so, as somebody that doesn't have ADHD, I think the perspective that I bring to coaching with my clients is, again, coming from a place of like, you're the expert in you. Like, I never say this is the system that you should try or that you need to try, or this is one that's going to work for you, but rather my background in mental health counseling helps guide me to ask a ton of questions. So my coaching style is probably different than other coaches, which is a good thing because I think there's the right coach out there if somebody's looking for a coach. The most important thing is to find a fit that feels right for you and for that coach. So I always say to all of my clients, like in our first meeting to see if working together would be the right fit, that if they haven't talked to another coach and they are wanting to like hear about different coaching perspectives, that I highly recommend that they do that because my asking a ton of questions, reflecting back what you're saying, and like collaborative brainstorming might not be what somebody's looking for.
Right.
But that's how I coach. Yeah.
I love that. I'm ready to send you all of my money right now. I know so, but there are a lot of different types of coaches out there. There's people that just specialize in ADHD, and I hadn't really heard of like executive functioning coaching, but I get it 100%, and I think it's super important. And a lot of people can benefit from the kind of coaching that you do, even like you said, people without ADHD.
Yeah.
So
And it's interesting too, because people, as we talked about, tend to come because they have a specific challenge or goal at work or at school. But more and more as I work with people, I would say at least 70 to 80% of people at some point in time or another bring up laundry and cooking. And they say like, I know this isn't what we're supposed to be talking about, or I'm wondering, is this something that we can talk about? And there's no right or wrong thing to talk about in coaching in terms of
right,
like executive functioning, because executive functioning covers all aspects of our lives.
right, yeah.
It is laundry, it is cooking, it is like managing your house, but it's also our goals, our interests, our hobbies, like all
It's
of those
money
things.
management. It's
It's,
your
it's money.
parenting. It is everything. So that is, so if somebody comes to you like, I'm really struggling in school,
Mhm.
there is a much bigger picture there.
Yes. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
even like people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, like balancing work with their home life and their personal life and keeping track of all the spinning plates that they have going on. So yeah, executive functioning is not just school, it's not just work. It's anything in life where you're creating a plan and starting a task and managing your time.
It's
And
our whole lives.
it's our whole lives. It truly is.
It
And so
is.
I think like for some people that can feel really overwhelming, but once we start diving into it, I think for a lot of people it's validating because they're like, I thought I was the only person who couldn't
Mhm.
manage my
I
laundry.
hear that so much. I hear it
Yeah.
so much. Yeah, people really don't, they think that there's like something wrong with them in the way that they move about the world. And I personally have felt that too. So I get that 100%. I still feel that sometimes. Like, why is this easy for my husband, but it's not easy for me? And
Mhm.
I've beat myself up like relentlessly for many years about it. So I'm just now getting to a place where I have more compassion for myself, more understanding, and it's like so huge to get to that point.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's the point you work with to get to your clients is what you're working towards.
One of my clients one time said, even though something might be considered simple, it doesn't mean it's easy. And
Mm,
that was like such a profound statement, like something that we consider to be a simple task, right? Like figuring out what we're going to cook for dinner. That's not simple. But like we think it should be. We think it should be easy. But when you really break down all of the thinking, decisions, action steps, like sequencing of events, like that's not a simple task. It takes a ton of cognitive power, like thinking
mm.
power. And if your brain has been in overdrive all day, something that maybe even you think should seem simple isn't going to feel easy because
Yeah.
it takes so much of that energy.
Yeah, I've learned, I've read somewhere about like your shelf space in your brain and like how the more stuff you put in there with ADHD, like stuff just kind of falls off the back of the shelf the more you put. So
Mhm.
like it depends on how like overwhelmed and overloaded you are that day. Like maybe making lunch is super complicated when you've had a super complicated day and you've had a very full day that is like one, it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back when you try to like do a simple quote unquote task, it
Mhm.
ends up being just so overwhelming. So it's so
That's
relatable.
That's such an important point too of like day to day, it can look different and it will look different, right? Like something you might have a system down for planning your day and another day you have a different energy, different mood, different things on your plate. And so a system that's worked for you, Monday isn't clicking with you on Tuesday. So being like kind to yourself, I think that's also a challenge. Like
Yeah.
and being flexible to
Well, it's so interesting to me that you don't have ADHD because I'm curious, like, are these things that you also struggle with or and just in a different way, or it's just like smaller? Like, my brain, I just think that like, and don't take this the wrong way, but I think sometimes neurotypicals like have it so easy, like it feels like everything just comes easier and natural, more natural. And in my experience has been that everything is just harder for me, and I'm not trying to minimize your experience in life or
no.
anything at all, but I'm wondering, like, do you, now that you've seen both sides, because you're kind of
Mhm.
like, how do you think that that differs from a neurotypical person with an ADHD to someone with ADHD?
No, I appreciate the question because I definitely don't compare my experiences or challenges to what my clients are talking about with me. But I do experience, I think so I'll speak just for myself. Like I do experience challenges with like planning my day, like time management, figuring out what I want to prioritize. So I'm self-employed, I work alone, I work from home.
Mm,
And
has a
so
lot of challenges.
there there are challenges that I enjoy some days, and some days I wish I had structure, more people, like a team. Um, but I would say like there are definitely pieces of executive functioning that I notice for myself day to day, week to week. And that I joke that like I will try to coach myself through it. But I think
Mm,
it's a human experience to like have some level of challenges with planning, organizing, time management,
mm,
prioritizing. Um, but the degree and like frequency to which we experience it varies from person to
mm.
person. So I think, again, speaking just for myself,
No, I like that because it reminds me that like it's a human experience and like we are all humans just trying to figure this crap out. And like your experience is no different than mine in that you have challenges just the same, just different challenges that I might have. So it just is nice because I don't want to be like the you versus me, like neurotypical versus the neurodiverse and all of, I don't want to make it us against you, but I am curious, like you see that people with ADHD are
so I
typically struggling more than the
more
average.
I would say
Yeah.
I would and I think that's the difference is it's a I so I will say I think it's a human experience that people do have challenges with executive functioning, and some people definitely have their systems down, but we all
Mm-hmm.
have blips or days that are more challenging. But
Mm-hmm.
I will say in the years that I've worked with a neurodivergent population, that the frequency, intensity, and impact of executive
Mm-hmm.
functioning challenges with my clients who have ADHD or another diagnosis that impacts their executive functioning is more visible for
Mm-hmm.
more it's more for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
They feel it more, they see it more.
It
They
impacts so much. Yeah.
and it ripples out.
Yeah.
And so I think like there is a difference, and I do think it's important to acknowledge that, that if somebody has ADHD or a diagnosis where their executive functioning is impacted, that is a very real
Yeah.
challenge, and the emotions and feelings that stir up with that are valid.
Yeah,
Like,
because sometimes what happens is that people will say like, "Well, everyone struggles to manage time," and things like that, which really kind of hurt someone with ADHD because I'm like, you think like, "Well, yeah, but is it affecting like your life, like
right.
your every part of your life?" And we hear that so much in the ADHD community where people are like, "Well, yeah, but everybody deals with that, and everybody deals with that," and it's like, well, yes, that's true. You probably deal with it to some degree, but people with ADHD are typically dealing with it at a much higher degree that's
Mhm.
just so overwhelming. And so I just want to like make it clear that like
Yeah.
yes, people do struggle with these things, but people with ADHD tend to struggle in a different way. And
I
and
think
it, and that conversation just kind of has to stop happening where people say, "Oh, well, everybody deals with that," because it's so hurtful for people with ADHD.
And I think that I appreciate that statement so much, because I think like people don't realize the impact that that statement has, like that it basically invalidates the experience of
Yeah.
having that degree of a challenge.
Yeah.
And I would say like, maybe the goal of a statement of like that is to like normalize, like everybody has a challenge with it, with time management, like it's okay if you're running late, like I would
Right.
just like that's I would my like if maybe that is somebody like try my assumption there is that maybe somebody's trying to like
Make
make
them
this
feel better.
feel
Yeah.
better, but the impact is felt in that it's like it's not validating that
Yeah.
you're.
It's
And
not. It's
so
like, oh, well, if everybody's dealing with this, then I'm dealing with it wrong. I must
right,
be I
yeah,
must be dealing with this wrong because if everybody's dealing with this, why am I struggling so much? And that's not fair
right. Well,
at
and then
all.
that goes back to our earlier conversation around like it's not
Yeah.
you that's the problem, it's the system that's the problem, like figuring
Right.
out a system that's going to work for you. And so I think like while the intent of a statement like that might be, I'm hoping that intent of somebody that's trying to provide support, or somebody that's trying
Um,
to understand an experience that they don't fully recognize the
yeah.
intensity
And
of.
how could they? I mean, how
Yeah,
could they really understand like how difficult it is for someone with ADHD if they don't have that experience. So I do understand sometimes it's coming from a place of love or compassion.
Mhm.
But that statement is just really hard for someone with ADHD. And I hear that so much where that's just, it's kind of painful to hear. Like,
Yeah.
it's almost like, well, get over yourself. Everyone's struggling. And it's like, well,
Yeah. I think
have
it's
you had 29 jobs? Because like I have. So it's like, no, I don't think it's the same, you know? So
no.
yeah, it's
I
just
think that's a
important.
really important distinction to make, that like even though everybody has challenges with some aspect of executive functioning at some point, those who have a diagnosis have significantly more challenges. And that's not to say that they'll always have that same intensity of challenges. Like it's, I think I want to make sure that like the message here is that it's validating that your challenges and experiences are real, and figuring out what's going to be most supportive for you will hopefully help like
Minimize.
minimize or like approach working with those, like building on your strengths basically. Like because again,
Yeah.
I think ADHD and challenges with executive functioning are often looked at as as you know, negative or
Yeah.
weaknesses.
Weaknesses. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like it's really important to recognize like what are the strengths that are on the
Yeah.
other side of that.
Yeah. Because one thing I've noticed is when I do have the right tools in place, like I am a queen.
Yeah. Yes.
If I am like in my energy and in my fire, like if I have the right tools and the right environment and like things are clicking, like I feel like okay, I'm a human again. Like I can do this. But if you're fighting that and you're on the outside looking in, it's just so hard.
Mhm.
So yeah, I thank you for like making that distinction that, you know, we are struggling more than the average Joe. And that's
Yeah.
why Sarah's here to help you not struggle so much. So yeah, I love that. So I do want to wrap up with one question that I ask every guest. I don't think I've asked it to someone who doesn't have ADHD, so I'm interested in your take on it. But the phrase ADHD is a superpower. How do
Mhm.
you feel about that phrase? And you might hear, I don't know, with your clients, like, do people really hate that phrase? Or
It's
what is that? What comes up for you when you hear it?
ADHD is a superpower. So that's not something that clients have brought up with me before. But I have kind of, I think maybe a mixed response. So I think like so speaking as somebody who does not have ADHD and somebody who has a background in social work and mental health counseling, I am all about empowering and strength based focus, as we just talked about, like recognizing your strengths, naming them, building on them, finding more space to use them. And so, in that sense, I really do like the phrase ADHD is a superpower, because you're finding that strength and power there for
Yeah.
yourself. On the flip of that, I will say, I think it's also really important to validate when somebody feels challenges or feels um, like like they're
Yeah.
learning about themselves and they haven't quite figured it out, or being able to like recognize that with a diagnosis like ADHD, there also comes challenges. And so if somebody is in that mindset of like, things are really hard right now, I'm trying to figure out what my systems are, but I'm really struggling. If they were to hear ADHD as a superpower, that wouldn't feel very validating in that
No.
moment. But I think like a reframe of that could be like ADHD can be a superpower.
Hmm.
ADHD will be a superpower if that's something that clicks for somebody.
Mm.
But again, I'm speaking from a perspective of not having ADHD.
Yeah.
And so I I always say to all of my clients, like, you're the expert in you. And so if something clicks for you, grab onto it. If something doesn't click for you, it's okay to leave it behind.
Yeah.
So that would
Yeah,
be,
I think that's the general consensus is like, yes, I can see how it can be a superpower, but I don't want to invalidate that people struggle and that it
yeah,
doesn't always feel like a superpower.
yeah, yeah.
I've been on both sides of that coin. And some days I feel like, wow, my brain is like amazing. I can't believe how fast I can read books and how fast I can put pieces together when I need to. And all of those things do feel like above average skills.
Mhm.
And sometimes I feel like I have below average skills because I'm just not picking things up the way that other people do. So I feel both of those very
Mhm.
deeply. And I know a lot of people do. So that's pretty spot on. So Sarah, tell us where we can find you on the interwebs and how people can work with you.
Yes. So I am most active on Instagram. My Instagram handle is executive functioning first. So I post strategies, tips, thoughts, and information about executive functioning on there. I also post pictures of my beautiful puppy, Georgia.
Ooh.
So there's, if you're a dog person, she's usually on there.
I'll take that dopamine hit. I'll go
Yeah,
on there and
exactly.
see some puppy
Exactly.
photos.
But yeah, Instagram is where I post, you know, information, free resources. It's also where I announce how people can work with me. So I do work one-on-one with clients doing coaching. So people can learn more about that through my Instagram or my website, which is executivefunctioningfirst.com.
Awesome. Do you
I
do any group coaching? Because I know,
Group
have you thought
coaching is
about it? Okay.
amazing.
Because
Yes.
group coaching is so, I feel like it's so important for people with ADHD to be in a room with
Yes.
other ADHDers. So
I
I'm
am
glad.
so excited to be offering group coaching starting in the spring of 2023. So I will be announcing what that's going to look like, what the groups are going to be. All of that will be coming early 2023. And then starting in January, actually, I am going to be co hosting some workshops,
Mm.
which are going to be about executive functioning and personal finances. So we briefly talked about how even money management is part of the executive functioning. Can be an
Can I
executive.
ask who you're working with on that? I probably know.
Yes. So Rachel Lawrence is
Okay.
a CFP. She is also a woman who is diagnosed with ADHD.
Okay.
And so we will be working together to offer some personal finance workshops starting in January.
I
Um,
think we need that before Christmas,
yes,
actually.
oh, I know. Well, yes. So it's called budgeting and beyond.
No, we need it all the time. It's fine. It'll be fine. We need it in
Yeah.
January, whatever month you're offering it, it will be handy, I'm sure.
Yeah. So we'll be announcing those. We're going to be offering it multiple times so that people can find a day and time that works for them. But it'll be a neurodivergent friendly workshop. So it'll be cameras off for anybody who's attending. So you don't have to worry about being on camera. We're going to have a workbook that'll help guide you through personal finances. And it'll be bite-sized actionable steps to help
Oh, I
you
love
manage
that.
your
I'm gonna have to
manage
sign up for
money.
that one.
Yes. Oh, please come. Yeah.
I
So
love that.
I'm actually going to be starting to announce it in December. And then the first one will be in January. So
Love that.
I'm super excited about that. A lot of my clients do ask about budgeting and money, and that's not an area of my expertise. So I never try to offer any advice or anything on that. So I'm really excited to partner with with Rachel.
Yeah, just a piece of the puzzle that another way to help people with ADHD, which I love. So, Sarah,
Exactly.
thank you so much for the work that you're doing for people with ADHD. Like it just makes my heart so happy because we need help. So I appreciate anyone who takes it as their personal mission to help people with ADHD is like really near and dear to my heart. So I really appreciate the work that you do and I'm going to have to work with you at some point. So
I look forward to it.
I need help.
Thank you so much for creating this space to be able to talk about executive functioning and to be able to normalize the conversation. I think that's so important so that people know they're not alone with these challenges that they might be experiencing, and to be able to name it as like, this is
Yeah,
I mean, this is
I wish I had known about this in high school, in college, in my 20s. Like, I'm in my mid 30s now and I'm just now understanding it, and that doesn't seem fair. And I like that, like, you're working with college students, because I feel like they are getting a leg up when a lot of people in my generation just didn't have that. And it will help the collective. It will help all of us to just, if the younger generations start to understand more about themselves, will help all of us as a whole. So it's just really good. I really like it. I really like what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I want to add to that. It's college students and also like women, young adults with ADHD, and the majority of whom actually are entrepreneurs.
Yes,
And
I
artists.
know.
Yes,
I know.
it is.
The coolest people on the planet have
Yes.
ADHD. And and it's so hard because people with ADHD just beat themselves up relentlessly, but we actually do have so many skills, and we're just focused on the negative ones, and we've not really highlighted our strengths. And I think that's important that you're doing that for people, because a lot of us can't do it for ourselves. We just don't see them. So it takes another person sometimes to point those out to us and to remind us that we have strengths. And people with ADHD are 300% more likely to be entrepreneurs. So
yes. Yeah, I work with some of the most amazing, smart, funny, kind, wonderful human beings. And I just feel so, so fortunate that I was able to find this field and connect with so many wonderful people. So
I'm glad you can see that. Yeah, I'm glad you can see that, because I see like how amazing ADHDers are, and I love that like a neurotypical brain can also see that.
Oh my gosh, yes. Literally, every day I'm amazed at what my clients are doing in the world and how they're touching so many lives in their own fields, in their own careers, in their personal lives. Truly just amazing people.
Aw, I know. It's so great, isn't it? Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to have you back on. And I will definitely put in our show notes some information about your upcoming workshop and how to get in touch with you. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much.
Thanks again for listening to My Lady ADHD podcast. You can find more ADHD content online at myladyadhd.com, and make sure to give me a follow on Instagram or TikTok at My Lady ADHD. Bye.